Good afternoon and welcome everyone to Inclusion We All Benefit, this afternoon's webinar. We still have some people logging in. We'll give about another minute and then we will go ahead and get started. Okay, it looks like people have joined us and logged in, so we will go ahead and begin the webinar. Welcome everyone. My name is Kim Brown and I'm with the Rural Institute for Inclusive Communities, Transition and Employment Projects, and I will be your moderator for today. This webinar is sponsored by Children's Special Health Services and is funded in whole or in part under a contract with the Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services. The statements shared in today's presentation do not necessarily reflect the opinion of the department. All attendees are currently muted. This helps to cut down on background noise so that everyone can hear the presenters. If you would like to ask the presenters a question or make a comment, please type your question or comment into the chat box. And please note that only you, the moderator, and the presenters will be able to see what you've typed into the chat box. We will have a question and answer period at the end of the presentations today. And so if you send in your questions at any time while people are presenting, we'll go ahead and hold on to those. And then during the question and answer time, we will read the questions to the presenters so that they can answer and so that all the audience members can hear. For those of you who requested Montana Office of Public Instruction renewal units when you registered, those will be emailed to you after the webinar, and it can take up to a couple of weeks to get the OPI renewal units out. Please note that you do have to have pre-registered and requested the OPI credit in order to receive it, and unfortunately we're currently unable to issue other kinds of attendance documentation. Today's session is being audio taped for the Transition and Employment Project's resource library, and the recording for today's webinar will be posted to the Transition and Employment Project's Training Archives page. And I just put the URL or website address for that page into the chat box if you're interested in looking for the recording. It can take a week or so to get that recording posted, but again, if you're interested in watching today's presentation again or in sharing it with people you know, that recording will be available. The slides for today's presentation are available right now in the handouts section, and if you don't see that on your dashboard, look to the upper right hand side of your screen and there should be an orange box with a white arrow in it. If you click on that, it will open up the dashboard, and that should allow you to see the area where you can type in questions, and it should also allow you to see where I've typed in the URL or website address for our Training Archives page. We do have the PowerPoint slides for today posted in the handout section, both as a PDF document and as a PowerPoint document, in case you're interested in downloading the slides and keeping them for future reference. At the end of today's webinar, a survey link will pop up. It's only 8 questions long, and we do ask that you please take the time to complete the survey. We read through all of the responses that we receive, and we use the information that you share with us to try to continually improve the training that we provide through these webinars. We also use the information that you provide to us to decide what topics we should be covering in our future webinar sessions. So again, please do take the time to complete that short survey. With that, I would like to go ahead and introduce the first of our 3 speakers for today, Isaac Baldry, and I'll go ahead and show you a photo of Isaac here. Isaac Baldry graduated from Custer County District High School in 2010. He attended the Montana Youth Leadership Forum in 2008 and works as the Region 1 coordinator for My Transitions. He has been a member of the Rural Institute Consumer Advisory Council since 2008, and I just have to let you know he has not missed a single meeting since 2008, which I find remarkable. He has presented on multiple webinars for the Rural Institute. Isaac currently is a private contractor for the Pre-Employment Transition Services Technical Assistance Center at the University of Montana. He speaks as a Special Olympics Global Messenger and has been a law enforcement torch run athlete ambassador for Montana. In November of 2012, Isaac was awarded the Executive Council International Athlete Award for his work. He is also self-employed as a national speaker focusing on youth issues and technology. His use of technology was featured in the 2012 spring edition of Apostrophe magazine. In 2004, he received the Yes I Can Award in the area of technology. Isaac is a local sports enthusiast. He will often be at the game, whatever the sport. In the summertime, he is busy with his raised garden beds. With that, I will turn it over to Isaac.
First, I want to thank you for taking the time to be part of the conversation about inclusion. I really wanted to be a part of this webinar because of how important inclusion is to me. Next slide, please. When I started thinking about and planning what I wanted to say, it felt like such a big project. I decided to start with why do I feel the way I do about inclusion. If you have heard me speak before, you've heard me talk about being part of a big family. I think my views on inclusion were again impacted by the values of my family. It seems odd to say this, but I don't think, growing up, my younger siblings even knew I had a disability. My disability was just a part of who I was. The expectation was that we were all doing everything together. Any one of us could have needed something in order to participate. We just looked at what did we want to do and what would be needed to accomplish it. In the community, we had to consider wheelchair access for me to participate with my family. If lack of access meant I couldn't participate, then no one participated. If it wasn't something we could do together, then it didn't have value to our family. We started from the perspective that family activities meant all. Sometimes we got creative, but that tended to add to the activity, because we were working together. It is really empowering to be so valued. I learned to expect to be a part, and even part of the solution, if one was needed. These experiences have shaped the values and views of myself and my family. Next slide, please. The Rural Institute for Inclusive Communities has a Consumer Advisory Council. Although the name of the council has changed over time, I have been a member of the group since 2007. As council members, we have the opportunity to participate in work groups and on projects that are of interest to us. In 2014, the council began discussions on creating and using a pocket of money to promote community-inclusive projects. The council formed a work group around the project we called the Community Investment Fund. The work group learned about how other states and university centers were using a grant like this to promote inclusion. We developed our materials and grant application so that we could start to promote the opportunity across the state. The Community Investment Fund would be used to promote the full inclusion of people with disabilities into their communities through participation in activities for all people. We were looking for projects that promoted people with and without disabilities, experiencing a life as equal and valued participants, learning, playing, and living as a community. In 2015, our first recipient of the grant was Summit Independent Living Center to support their work on a local project of a live comedy and variety show they called Missoula Live. It was a 10-week communication through improvisation program for individuals with and without disabilities, with a final performance, in which 17 participants were the cast. In 2016, the grant was awarded to Eagle Mount of Great Falls to support their Tippy Toes movement, music, and play program. A class offered in 6-week sessions, for infants and toddlers, with and without disabilities. The goal of their program was to increase the understanding and accepting of diversity, giving families in the community the opportunity and choice to enjoy the same places and activities as anyone else. As we have worked on this project, one of the biggest challenges to me personally was to help people really understand what inclusion is. I now believe that it is the responsibility of the Community Investment Fund project to teach and model through our support what inclusion is. Next slide, please. This often brings about the uncomfortable conversation of what truly is included. Although it has to vary based upon the needs of the individuals, inclusion is happening well when the people participating together don't notice the differences. By that I mean, we are focused on the value of all people and what they bring to a project, instead of just seeing a person by their disability. I thought maybe going through a few examples may help you understand what I am talking about. Let's start with the idea of a dance. While in high school, I was able to attend several dances. Some of what I experienced was inclusive, and some not quite the same as my peers. Being at the dance with all the other students was a blast. I would have considered it an inclusive activity. I was able to participate in all parts, including the Grand March. Grand March is a community activity for how all attendees enter the dance. Those planning the dance, when I was attending, included me and planned for my entrance into the gymnasium. People considered that I would need wheelchair access, and that meant no stairs for anyone entering the dance. They didn't change the entrance process. Officers and the planning committee enter the dance first. I didn't get to go first, just because I use a wheelchair. I waited in line with my date for our turn to be announced. Once in the dance, we planned for me to have access to the end of the table, but I sat with my date and friends. We did all the same things, pictures, dancing. It was a social activity. Before the dance, either a girl asked me, or I had to be brave and ask a girl. Same as everyone. I would buy tickets, and the girls took care of flowers. We did pictures at parents' houses, and then went to dinner. Dinner was the tough part. I would have to have assistance at dinner, for eating and drinking. That meant I needed an aide to support me. It created a situation where it was not just peers. My aide tried to be away from the table as much as possible, but would need to be there sometimes. This made it uncomfortable for others. I think it would have been less stressful if we had gone to dinner as a group, but that never worked out. Being included as I was, gave me the opportunity to have a shared experience that was the same as my peers. My being at the dance was valued. People wanted to have the experience with me. Sometimes we hear of special dances. A dance that others will put on, so that people with a disability get to attend such an event. The goal is to create a social activity for people with disabilities, because it is viewed they don't have the same social opportunities. People putting the dance together often feel good about doing something for someone else, someone that they may feel is less than them. I am not saying doing something for others is wrong. I am just saying, is this kind of activity inclusive? Would I go to an activity like that? It depends. It is nice to be treated special. Everyone enjoys others focusing on how great you are, wanting you to have a good time. But if one group is doing it for others, they feel are lesser in value, or believe they couldn't have such an opportunity for themselves, what are we saying about each other? Another thing I would think about would be, are my friends going? If anyone is thinking about going to something social, they want to be there with the people they consider their friends. The people they want to share the experience with. For an activity like I am describing, does that mean as a person with a disability, my only friends can be other people with a disability? What if I wanted other friends to come, who didn't have a disability? They couldn't, because they were not the type of people the dance was for. How could we make the idea of a dance inclusive? What if it were just a community dance? How would planning be affected if people with disabilities were part of planning for the dance? Could they possibly identify barriers, or what they may need, so that they could have the same experience? Do we value and benefit from each other when people with and without disabilities share experiences? It can create an opportunity for people to see each other just as people with individual strengths. These opportunities could be anything in the community: volunteering, working, playing. The point is, all are valued as needed for success. Next slide, please. I will give you another example, but more personal for me. This last summer, my family didn't have time to really plan a vacation together. We try to spend some time as family and together every summer. As many as could carved out a few days before the start of the new school year. My two younger siblings, both, were going to be starting back at college. They don't come home for the summer, so if we don't make time together, it just won't happen. We all like to go to Yellowstone, so we found a house just outside the park. We went south near Island Park, Idaho, as it was an area we had not explored. And with short planning, found an accessible home to rent for anyone who could make it. We met there and worked out plans for what we wanted to be sure and do. One day was to be in the park, and another was to explore the local area. We made plans to go to Mesa Falls. We had never seen them. We checked online for wheelchair access. All looked good. We packed a picnic and took off for the day. It was a short drive, but long enough we were glad to get out of the car and walk. We could now tell from the park map there was an accessible trail, and in places there were stairs. We checked at the ranger station. No worries, we could definitely see the falls from the accessible trail. Glad to be out and moving, we took off for the falls. When we got to the falls, yes, we could see the falls, but we could also see the stairs that lead to a better view at the top of the falls. I told everyone to just go ahead. I can see them. They will be just below me. Some went down to the falls. My little brother, I say that because he is younger. I remind him, he is the little brother. He is also 22, 6'2", and a 190-pound college athlete, so, not really little. He didn't like how it felt at the bottom without me. The experience was wrong. He ran back up. Told me I was going down to the falls. The wheelchair couldn't do the stairs, but I could. He unbuckled me from the chair, let me adjust myself so I could see, and we both were off down the stairs. It wasn't going to be the right experience, unless we were all together at the same time, making the same memory. We took pictures, threatened to throw each other over the railing, but all went to this new place in a shared experience. None of us would have valued it the same if we were not together. Carrying me down and up the stairs didn't faze my brother. He still moved just as fast, and we beat everyone to the top. It created an opportunity where we even felt more bonded because it was together. We hiked a bit more, and went back to the ranger station for a suggestion on an accessible location along the river for our picnic. It was my favorite day of the trip. I think his favorite too, as our picture is his Facebook background. It isn't the first time my brothers have made sure I was included, regardless of the temporary roadblock. For all of us, the value we have together is what matters. Experiences are not the same if we allow exclusion. They get it because they have felt the experience. They know what is possible and won't settle for less. Next slide, please. Not everyone gets to experience inclusion. I want to talk about what inclusion sometimes looks like at school. I think I have to share what that looked like for me. In grade school, kindergarten through 6th grade, I was a part of the regular class. I was in with my peers all the time, except when I left for therapies. This wasn't how it was for all students with a disability. Even the special education teacher didn't know why I wasn't in her class. It had to be written into my IEP that she could not come and remove me from my class. My peers saw me as part of their class, not part of those other kids. They didn't see my disability, they just accepted everything for how I was. I was expected to do everything else regular students do. Other students came into our class for parties or certain activities, but then they went back to their class. They were not viewed the same as me by peers or most teachers. Why? Junior high and the start of high school were rough. Now it was viewed I couldn't be in the regular class. I really struggled with being disconnected from my peers. In high school, I started asking to be back in the regular classes. Some teachers got it. They had expectations for me. They just knew I may have to adjust how I did an assignment or activity. Some teachers didn't get it. They understood they had to let me in their class, but they didn't expect anything from me. Some teachers even had such low expectations, I had to tell them what I would be doing in their class. What would be my work? All these things affected how I felt about myself and how my peers felt about me. We have to teach inclusion. What does it say to other students when it is okay for a person with a disability to just show up? The expectation is not that they will do anything or contribute. They get the same grade just for being in the room. We are not teaching that all have something to contribute, that our success is based upon everyone participating and having a shared experience. These attitudes affect everyone. Peers don't know how to interact. They need it modeled. Teachers don't always realize their low expectations aren't being kind. Giving someone a break just because they have a disability teaches the person with a disability not to expect much from themselves. What could happen if we taught all are capable, all belong, and all have value in order to have success? Next slide, please. Sometimes we try to create inclusion, but think inclusion is just measured by do we have people with and without disabilities in the group. In this scenario, I am talking about what I will call token people. We invite a person with a disability to be a part of an activity or board. We want to show individuals with disabilities are represented. The problem can be, what do we expect from the person with a disability? Did we want them to just show up? Did we consider what they would need to actively participate? Did we consider what they bring as a person? Do we feel we need their participation to achieve success? How we address these questions can make a huge difference toward inclusion. it can work the other way too. We may have a group of people with disabilities, and add in a person or two without a disability to create what we now call inclusion. Is the person without a disability paid to be there? Are they a volunteer, doing something nice for all those people with a disability? Inclusion is not really about numbers, how many people, with or without a disability, are part of the group. Inclusion has more to do with valued participation as a group toward a shared outcome. And by participation, I mean in all aspects, not just the fun stuff. It is why, in our application process for the Community Investment Fund, we specifically ask if individuals with a disability are a part of the grant application. We want to know if they are part of the idea, part of the planning, to what extent are all being valued toward the end activity. This also goes back to the independent living concept of nothing about us without us. People with I hope I have not come off too harsh. I also hope I have made you stop and think about what inclusion is or could be. Inclusion is important to me. It is something I will continue to work on, as I believe inclusion matters to all of us. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Isaac, for your outstanding information. Wonderful. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to our next presenter, and as I mentioned, we'll have time for questions, we hope, at the end of the presentations today after all three speakers have gone. So let me introduce our next speaker for today. Sierra Lodi learned to use augmentative alternative communication at the age of 3 that enabled her to be competitive in the educational setting despite her quadriplegia and being nonverbal. Through her sheer tenacity, she achieved an Associate of Arts degree in 2012 from the University of Montana College of Technology at the age of 28. Sierra is an advocate for youth with disabilities and serves on the University of Montana Rural Institute Consumer Advisory Council. And I'll note that Sierra has also been a member of our council for many, many years and has done a number of presentations and has also developed some great products related to mental health. Sierra was a delegate at the first Montana Youth Leadership Forum in 2000. She continued to support the forum as a volunteer for the next 10 years. Sierra was appointed to the National Youth Leadership Network in 2002 in Washington, D.C., and appointed to the National Youth Leadership Network Advanced Institute in 2005. Sierra was awarded the 2005 Emerging Leader Award from the Montana Council on Disabilities at Montana State University. Most recently, Sierra attended the Pacific Leadership Academy's training conducted by the Pacific Alliance on Disability Self-Advocacy in San Francisco. Sierra is passionate about mental health issues as they affect youth who have disabilities and are transitioning into the adult world. Sierra has a website that promotes her motivational speaking business, and that's speakingoutofthebox.com. And with that, I will turn it over to Sierra.
This is an incredible opportunity for me to talk about what inclusion means to me and to others who have disabilities, and what inclusion should mean to everyone. I could talk about what inclusion is not. However, I have experienced what inclusion is in so many aspects of my life that I want to share some of the true inclusion examples that have made such a positive influence on my life. Let's start with kindergarten. I owe so much of my inclusiveness as a student in the whole school experience to my school district's physical therapist. She came into the classroom the very first few minutes of the first day of the school year, and she introduced me to the other students as a kid who is more like them than is different from them. She told them that I like to do the same kinds of things that they like to do, and play and learn, only sometimes in a little bit different way. This wise woman came into every classroom the first day of every new year, explaining how much more I was like them than I was different from them. Of course, she would adjust her talk based on the new grade level. By the time I was in middle school, there weren't very many kids who didn't know who I was. I was in all regular classes through junior year in high school. In my senior year I focused more on literacy, in addition to core subjects. I took theater for 3 years, and the theater teacher had me participate in every aspect of the class, including speaking parts in plays, set design, and being a co-producer. When teachers get it, they are setting the example on how all students should be recognized and valued. Here are a couple of video clips from elementary school that show examples of my inclusive school environment.
Okay, and we'll go ahead. I'm going to get the videos set up here, so this may take me just a minute. Bear with me. Okay. Just need to get the video up here and ready to play, so almost have it. Okay. There we go. Hopefully you can see it now. So we'll go ahead, and I'm going to turn up the volume as loud as I can, but just know also that these are fairly old video clips, so they may be a little bit difficult to see in here. Okay, so we'll bring up the next video clip.
I will introduce you to a Helena girl who is using a computer to truly communicate.
Well, for many people, computers have become a useful tool. But for a young Helena girl, a computer is her way of communicating. And now she's teaching others with disabilities to do the same. Your hair looks cool. 11-year-old Sierra Lodi communicates through this computer. Because of cerebral palsy, Sierra is unable to walk or talk, and she has no use of her hands. But through a temple switch that she operates with her head, the fifth grader is able to access the computer through that switch rather than a keyboard. This is my second year in Girl Scouts. I'm a junior Girl Scout. It consists of screens that change. She can hit a button and go from one screen to another. She currently has over 50 screens available that have conversation, unlimited conversation on them, and we can add virtually hundreds of screens for her. Carol says through the computer and a special program designed especially for non-speaking students, Sierra is able to compete with her 5th grade classmates at Rossiter School. It's a compact little system. She has her communication. She has her computer, which goes from class to class. She has reference material, which is a dictionary. She has geography atlases. Because of the strides Sierra has made with her computer, the makers of the program have asked her to show off her skills. This week, Sierra and her family are in California at a technology conference for people with disabilities. Sierra is exhibiting the program at the Inventors booth.
Watch. People will see how I can talk and write using my computer.
Carol says Sierra was the first non-speaking student in Helena to use a communication system. And now, 7 years later, she and her parents hope that Sierra can teach others with disabilities to speak out and learn through computers.
Great story.
Okay, and we have one more clip here to share with you. Just get it paused and queued up. Okay.
Fun period history class, and if she's in a bad mood, we'll have a test. Great class. All right, here's Sierra. Here's Cindy Duchin. We'll see how to work a quiz when Sierra is in a regular classroom with everyone else. There's Mr. Everett.
I want you to history one. Now I want to write over the piece of paper, number 1 through 13. 1 through 13. You should still know this. Here's from the day's course lecture.
I love doing this.
Because she likes some. Wait. You know, Brian. Monday's lecture most good. Tuesday's lecture. Question number 1. Question number 2.
This is a
And
word
question number 3. Would you please give me the 3 phases of a normal business cycle? For number 1, number 2, and number 3. I had a circle on the board Tuesday, and we talked about it. The 3 phases of a normal business cycle. One, 2, and 3. Number 4, in 1931, a group of veterans got together and organized this in order to demand some compensation payments. What was it called? A group of veterans that got together in 1931 demanding some compensation payments that were due them, and organized this event. What was the name of the event?
Okay.
Second stop, Kim.
Okay, we turn it back over to Sierra.
I have had the privilege of being a part of what I consider to be the epitome of a social inclusive life experience. It is called Peers Unlimited. It stands for Partners Ensuring Equal Rights and is a nonprofit agency. This year Peers is celebrating their 25th year. Originally, Peers was started by a group of parents who saw a need in their children with special needs. Their focus was on interaction with peers and socialization. One of the highlight events sponsored by Peers has always been summer camp. One of the most effective programs over the years has been Peer Pals. By partnering individuals with and without disabilities, friendships formed have led to lasting relationships. Many of the pals have gone on to occupations providing services to individuals with developmental disabilities. Although the specific activities offered by the agency have changed over the years, the primary focus continues to be on social and integrative activities for individuals. Many of the original kids involved with Peers now continue their involvement in the adult services we offer. When visiting the Peers website, I took note of the word, integrative, and I was struck by the fact that I had never encountered the word. I looked it up in several places, and I was delighted to come up with a definition that totally summed up my personal feelings about inclusion. Integrative means serving, or intending to unify separate things, to incorporate parts into a whole. Voila! Inclusion is just that, with people. I started my Peer Pal association with Peer Pal lunches in school when I was in 4th or 5th grade. The school district agreed that Peer Pals could meet during the lunch period in a smaller designated room, in each school once a week. Kids without disabilities were invited to see what Peer Pals was all about, and to get to know kids with disabilities in a very social and fun environment, directed by a very fun and committed paraprofessional on her own time. Relationships formed naturally, and organized activities such as bowling, ice skating, dances, etc. were scheduled in the community, totally independent of the school system. These activities were the result of the relationships developed during Peer Pals lunches. From then on, every summer there were 4 unforgettable days of Peers Camp. Camp is totally like camps for kids who do not have disabilities. A regular camp, such as a church camp, YMCA camp, Lions camp, etc. that has a river, lake or pond location, is selected within a 2-hour distance of Helena, Montana. The best way for me to describe Peer Pals Peers Camp is to show you a reality movie. The Peer Pals who do not have disabilities are there because they want to be. Their payment is just plain fun. They love Peers Camp just as much as the kids who do have disabilities. I always had the time of my life at Peers Camp, and the best feeling, of all feelings, is to be included. Please enjoy.
Another turning point, a fork stuck in the road. Some grabs you by the wrist, direct you where to go. Don't make the best of this past and don't ask why. It's not a question, but a lesson learned in time. It's something unpredictable, but in the end that's right. I hope you had the time of your life. So take the photographs and still frames in your mind. Hang it on a shelf in good health and good time. Take these memories and ask in a trial. For what it's worth, it was worth all the while. It's something unpredictable, but in the end it's right. I hope you had the time of your life.
silly. Andrew, what are you doing, my friend? You can see. You going bubble? Throw me a bubble. Throw me a bubble. Woo, good job. Oh, we're playing a wild game of free tag. Yeah. Oh, I just got smacked really hard by Joe in the back. Uh-oh. We are saving Horace Gavin, and we're going to be putting on the nice little leg area to go to camp. Now, I'll introduce everyone to you so you know who everyone is. We have our evil stepmother. Our evil stepmother. We have our two evil stepsisters. We have Cinderella. Wonderful, amazing girl. We have our amazingly talented, strong, great, handsome, and charming Prince Charming. Our double blower. And then we have the other people in there. There you go. And then, of course, most important, we have the fairy godmother. And I am the voice of the fairy godmother. Cinderella really wanted to go to camp. And it was written about him and his dad, and was given to his mom and his sister. And then later on, I was asked. Let it be okay. Brought him home to say something wasn't right and said. We don't say so fine. You don't want to marry on time. We don't want to marry on time. We don't want to marry on
Okay, Sierra, do you have last words?
Reflection on what true inclusiveness means to me had been of benefit to you. Thank you. I hope that my reflections on what true inclusiveness means to me have been of benefit to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sierra, for sharing your information and your video clips. It was great to see you when you were so very, very young. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our final speaker of the day, Sarah Mulligan. Sarah has called Missoula home since 1983. She has 4 amazing children ranging in age from 6 to 19 and understands inclusion from a parent perspective. Sarah's background is education, and for many years she worked at the University of Montana. She has been a teacher for young children with disabilities, the owner of a toy store, and the executive director of an international membership organization. Today she is a licensed realtor. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much. Well, are we good on the slideshow? Kim? There we go. All right. Well, since this is a presentation from a parent perspective, I thought I would start by introducing my amazing children. You want to go ahead and advance it, Kim? First, there's Emma. She's 20. And then Jojo. She's 11. Then there's Annie Jung sitting on Emma's lap. She's 9 now. And my baby, my son Aiden, is 7. As you can see, ours is a very diverse family, and it's actually a crazy, busy, never dull, but always keeping me busy family. And I hope that ours is an inclusive family. And I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about what inclusion means within our family and what it means from the perspective of each of my children. So, inclusion, for me, there's many, many different ways to define inclusion, and I know we've heard some definitions already today, and if I ask each one of you, you probably have your own version, but I want to give this as my definition. Inclusion is the expectation that every single one of us has the right to participate fully in whatever activities and experiences the world has to offer. I'm a parent, so inclusion isn't just about school to me, it's about inclusion in everything. I absolutely believe that we all deserve to live in a world where it doesn't matter if you have blonde hair or one leg or skin condition or wear glasses or have an intellectual disability. Everyone should have the opportunity to participate. And if that isn't happening, I feel like what we really need to come to terms with is our society is missing out on an awful lot. Now, some of you may have actually been more comfortable if I limited my presentation to school or had given you kind of a more narrow definition of inclusion, something like providing services in the least restrictive environment or including children in activities with their peers. But in a sense, I feel that's too easy. Inclusion is a huge concept, and it's one that can't be hidden away in a definition or in a particular setting. For me, inclusion is a mindset. It's that absolute expectation that any individual has the right and the obligation to participate in this world, and we all collectively share that responsibility for making it happen. So, to make it a little bit more personal, let me tell you how my family practices inclusion. There is not, and never has been, a doubt in my mind that every one of my children can participate in the activities that they enjoy, have extremely wonderful experiences with their friends, do chores, go to restaurants, participate in church services. We proceed through life expecting that it will all happen, and we pull in whatever resources we need along the way to make sure that happens. My background is special education, as Kim said, and I know that we often talk about strategies and accommodation when we talk about inclusion. I taught for years about how to do inclusion, but for just a minute I want to encourage you not to think that way. For the next little bit, I want you to think and focus on the expectation of inclusion. And to help you see what I mean, I'm going to share with you my all-time favorite inclusion question. It was asked by a parent of a child with a disability in my community. Her daughter's just a few years younger than mine. And she said, "How did your daughter get in that dance class?" This was Jun's second year of dance, and she, along with all the other little girls, were dancing away in their little pink tutus and tights, and I didn't want to be irreverent, but you know the answer to that question? I filled out the registration form and I paid the tuition. The question and the fact that this mom had to ask the question broke my heart. It was clear that she didn't have the expectation that her child with a disability would be able to be enrolled in ballet. She didn't have the expectation that her child could be enrolled just like every other child. She thought I had done something magical or I had pulled some strings. Without the expectations, though, it's really not likely that her child would have the chance to dance. It's the expectation, I think, that gets the ball rolling. So there's my Jung, Annie Jung, we call her Jung. When she was ready for kindergarten, there wasn't a doubt in my mind that she would go to our neighborhood school just like her two older sisters. But here's the awful thing. There were doubts in the minds of others, serious doubts. Friends and neighbors asked, where was she going to go to school? As if there was some place that would be better for her than our neighborhood school. The school felt that because she had Down syndrome, she needed specialized instruction and she would be much better served in a different school that had more, better, special services. They worried that she wouldn't be able to learn in a typical school. And they said, you might be doing her a disservice by not letting her get those extra services. She's only 9, folks. This was not the dark ages. But my little Jung is the sparkly, spunky girl whose most favorite thing in the world is to be one of the gang. And she has thrived in school. She made it clear that she did it, not me, made it clear that she hates to be pulled out of her classroom, doesn't want to miss anything that the other kids are doing. She has best friends. And she has teachers who see her as a totally amazing little girl who make modifications here and there to make sure that she has the opportunity to participate in everything. But for the most part, it's kind of no big deal. And then there's Aiden, a totally different story, but not really. Jung has this very easy personality to include. She has strong skills compared to her peers. She's cute, she's pleasant, eager to please. But Aiden had a very rough first few years of life. Now, at the age of 7, he is amazingly cute, don't you think? But he speaks mostly with gestures or one-word phrases. Sometimes, even those are really hard to understand. His play skills are more like those of a 2-year-old. He's not toilet trained. And he has some behaviors that make him, shall we say, stand out from the crowd. But the expectation for inclusion is exactly the same. And the result is the same. Aiden is thoroughly enjoying his second year of kindergarten in a regular classroom. It just works. So 2 children, same expectation. I think that is the most important idea I want you to leave with. It's the expectation that gets the job done. It gets us focused on what we need to do. So I hope by now you've picked up my emotional or passionate side of inclusion. I won't lie, I do know that inclusion takes work. Those strategies and accommodations we talked about are very important to making the inclusion successful. But I have found if you don't start with the expectation, you might find that you really aren't embracing inclusion. So let me give you an example, maybe familiar to what you've heard already today. Recently I chatted with a couple of parents who were a little bit discouraged, and they wanted their young adult children to have more social experiences. These are folks that whose children had just graduated from high school. So they were brainstorming all sorts of great ideas, but I sat there horrified because their ideas were things like hold a dance for all the kids, in quotes, who just graduated from high school. How about rent out the clay studio for folks with disabilities? What about starting a youth group, a citywide youth group for church at a church where all the kids with disabilities can go? So the expectation for inclusion wasn't there. Now those ideas weren't bad, but if you don't start with inclusion as your goal, you'll end up with something that doesn't even come close to the ideal of everyone participating. It doesn't even come close to the idea that what we want to see is inclusion happening in all those activities that already exist for in our communities. So start with the expectation and then ask yourself and those around you, what's it going to take to make this work? So I want to break it into some key ideas for you. And the first one is a really tough one. Be sure you have the expectation for inclusion. And I don't mean that lightly. It's not as easy as it looks. For decades, we have been doing something that is not quite inclusion. So we naturally gravitate to, isn't it cool to start a church group for people with disabilities? Isn't it cool to have this activity just for people with disabilities? So I think I really want you to sort of sit back and say, ooh, what is my expectation? And if you're in a professional or in a personal situation in which you have a person with a disability in your life, make sure that inclusion is what you expect to happen. So the next one is that inclusion doesn't just happen. I know it. It takes resourceful beings and a lot of support. And I probably should underscore a lot of support. I think that is where, for me, it is a civic responsibility, not just for my own children, but for my community. I want to make sure that we collectively put together the support that's needed, and when we have resources, people who know how to do this, that we take advantage of them. The next one is, to be successful, inclusion needs to be highly individualized. If you find this great support that makes it work with Joan, I promise you it will not work with Aiden. Every person needs individualized support enabled in order for inclusion to work for one very basic reason. The things that one person might be interested in are not the same things that another person might be interested in. And sometimes for me, going back to that, have the expectation for inclusion, who in the world would have thought that Joan wants to do violin? I wouldn't have. I wouldn't have planned that. I wouldn't have jumped in with that. That came from her. That's her interest. So my job, now that we've mastered ballet, my job is to start working on violin. How's that going to work? So again, I think you need to be thinking about this from a very, very specific and individual perspective. The next one is a really important one to me. Inclusion isn't a goal. It's the strategy. Because what we really want is for every single one of us to get to participate, to do what we are most interested in doing, to share our talents, to accomplish our dreams, to have fun, to live in the best way that we possibly can. And inclusion is a way for us to get there. But inclusion can't be the goal. It can't be really what we're striving for. It's just our very best strategy to make sure that we're not missing those dreams and goals and life experiences. And finally, when inclusion doesn't work, don't lose the expectation. Tweak the support. Just because it didn't work in first grade like you thought it was going to work, don't stop doing it in second grade. Just change the levels of support, the types of support. Maybe you're giving too much support. Maybe you're pulling too much attention to the kid as opposed to really making it be a naturally occurring event to have the child in that particular classroom. So think about that when inclusion isn't working, because it's not always easy, but just don't lose your expectation. So I want to take the next couple minutes and share what inclusion looks like for each of my children. One of the advantages of getting to present as a parent is that you get to show cute pictures of your kids. Thank you very much. So I want to start with Jung. There's not a doubt in her mind that she is one of the kids. She proudly points out her school. She can't wait to see her friends. She does homework just like everybody else. And very importantly, the other kids in her class see her every day doing the same things that they're doing, and they don't think anything of it. They probably don't realize that her math skills maybe are not quite as high as theirs. They've gotten used to her speech delays. It's just the way things are. And when she has a best friend who's willing to go shopping for glasses with her, you know she has those kinds of inclusive experiences that I was hoping for. So for Aiden, every single day, this kid learns something new about how to behave in the world. And let me tell you, these are not lessons that I ever could have taught him. Earlier this week, he was in line at the beginning of the morning for school with his classmates, and several of the kids, boys, were pushing and shoving, and he was watching them, and he pushed the little girl in front of him, who was his best friend, a very sweet little girl who just wouldn't hurt a fly. Very, very good friend of his. She turned around, and her reaction to him pushing her was to cry. She had these little tears in her eyes. She was like, what in the world happened? He immediately melted, said he was sorry, patted her gently. He had a life lesson right there in line for school that might seem tiny to some of you, but for the rest of his life, he has to live in this world and learn what's appropriate, what's expected, what the consequences are when it's not. He isn't going to learn how to make this world his own without totally participating in it. So if you took him out of these everyday little kid experiences today, he would not be the man I expect him to be in 20 years. And then there's JoJo. JoJo does not have a disability. She's an extremely bright child, but it was only recently that she kind of started to get it, that both of her siblings have Down syndrome, and that because they both have Down syndrome, they share some similar characteristics. She has always just seen them as Jung and Aiden, brother and sister, and really didn't need that label or really didn't note that label as important. And to this day, this kid does not understand why some of her friends are uncomfortable with their younger siblings' behaviors. We have kids in and out of this house constantly, and it amuses me no end that Joe just kind of, it's like, what? That's normal. That's the way it is. And then there's Emma. She is now a young woman in her first grown-up job as a nanny to a young adult with autism. Her job is to help this 13-year-old girl do all the things that her peers are doing, spend her allowance, put on makeup, eat at restaurants, and Emma sees her job as making sure that this little girl fits in. She sees her job as inclusion, and I just think that's really, really cool. She doesn't see any other way. She just knows that that's kind of the way it's got to have to be. So in closing, I want to go back to the question I shared with you earlier about dancing, and I want to finish the story. So this fall, we went to register for ballet lessons, and there my daughter saw the Nutcracker poster on the wall, and she looked at me and asked if she was going to be in the Nutcracker. This child has ambition, let me tell you. So I have to admit that as much as I embrace inclusion, when she asked me about being in the Nutcracker, I hesitated. This little bitty voice in me said, oh, what if they won't let her? What if what if they do let her and she can't do the dance? What if she gets in and she messes up the entire performance that people pay $30 to see? And that sort of catch is that what I was talking about earlier. Make sure you have that expectation, and it's got to be front and center. What I said, because I believe it, was, yep, yeah, sure, you can try. You have to audition. So she went through the auditions just like everyone else. And for 3 months, she got in. And for every month, For 3 months, she practiced super hard, and this past December, she danced in our community's production of The Nutcracker in a huge theater. She loved the makeup and the costume and the dressing room and the flowers, every single bit of it. And the only reason that she got to enjoy it was because in our family, we have the expectation of inclusion. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and lovely photos of your children, just like you said.
Thank you.
Share them. Wonderful. So at this point, we will open it up to questions from the audience, and while we're waiting for people to type those in, I'm just going to put up a couple of slides that show some resources related to inclusion that you might be interested in. If you have questions for the presenters, for Sierra and for Isaac, it's easier if you can ask questions that require a short response because they don't have a lot of time on the webinar to program in their responses on their communication devices. So yes and no questions, for example, are a lot faster and easier to answer. Also, Sierra has given permission for her mother, Carol, to answer any longer questions on Sierra's behalf. They communicate through lots of nonverbal methods, and so Sierra is able to get her answers to her mom quickly as well. So some of the questions Carol may be answering on Sierra's behalf, again with Sierra's permission. If you have questions, type them into your chat box. If you don't see the chat box on your screen or the question box, look on the upper right-hand area of the screen. There should be an orange box with a white arrow in it. Click on that, and that will open up the question or chat area. And at this point, I will go ahead and unmute all of our presenters so that they'll be available to answer any questions you might have. Brenda will be our moderator for any of the questions, so as they come in, if you want to go ahead and read them out, Brenda, and I'll just keep showing these resource slides. So any questions for any of our presenters today? And remember that if you have a question to ask, you'll need to type it in. We aren't able to hear audience members. They stay muted throughout the presentation. So if you have a question, do type it into your chat box, please. I think I have one more resource slide to share with you here. And these resources, these slides are available to you in the handout section. So if you'd like to have the resource slides to print off or to write the information down from, you can find them in the handouts area in your dashboard. Do we have any questions, Brenda?
No, just some thank yous from participant or from those that have attended.
Excellent, great. Well, I'll go ahead and do our closing information here, and then when I'm finished, if any questions have come in, we can answer those, and otherwise we will finish up for the day. So just a reminder that a short survey will appear on your screen as soon as the webinar ends. Please take the time to complete that survey. Our next webinar will be part of the Pre-Employment Transition Services series. It will be a two-part webinar. The webinar title is Preparing Youth with Disabilities for Careers and College Through an Evolution of Pre-ETS Activities. The first part of that webinar will take place on February 9th, the second part on March 9th. Both of those webinars will be from 10:30 until 12 o'clock Mountain Time. And the flyer for the February 9th, part 1 of the webinar has already gone out. The registration information is posted on the Transition and Employments Project website. So if you're interested in reading more about that webinar and perhaps registering, you can go to the training page of our website. And I did post that URL or website address in the chat box at the beginning of today's webinar, so you can find it there. The next webinar that's part of our Children's Special Health Services series will be on independent living, and that will be held on March 28th from 1 until 2:30 Mountain Time. We do not have the registration or flyer information ready for that yet, but we will be sending it out to Montana Transition email list members when it is ready. Just a reminder that the recording from today's webinar will be posted to the Training Archives page on the Rural Institute Transition and Employment Project's website. So if you're interested in sharing it with other people or in rewatching it yourself, take a look in usually a week or so and we'll have it posted up there. I wanted to thank all of our presenters today. I feel very lucky to have had the opportunity to listen to you, hear your experiences, hear what inclusion means to you, and also to learn some great ideas about ways that we can make an inclusion an expectation and really ensure that we're living our lives inclusively and assisting everyone around us to do the same. I'd like to thank all of our audience members as well today for taking time out of your afternoon to join us and listen into the session. The Community Investment Fund that Isaac spoke about during his presentation will be opened up, that competition, sometime later this spring. And so if you or the agency you work for or a group that you're part of is interested in applying for those funds, be watching. We'll send out notices to the listserv members as we move into the spring of it, and we'll announce when the funding will become available. So if you have inclusive projects that you're interested in getting some funding for, be watching for the announcement of the Community Investment Fund. Do we have any questions, Brenda?
We do have one question here, and it's in regards to inclusiveness in the Nutcracker that Sarah's daughter was in, and what they're asking is they're interested in hearing Sarah's opinion on doing targeted outreach to people with disabilities rather than events for individuals with disabilities only. And for an example, the dance studio does targeted outreach to encourage people with disabilities to participate.
Sarah, you might still be muted. We're not hearing your response.
Oh, sorry. So I'm going to start this response by saying I live in a world of my own design where inclusion just happens, and inclusion is what we all collectively appreciate and collectively move toward. However, I don't really necessarily support the idea of targeted outreach activities, and this is, again, my own opinion. And one of the reasons for that is I think inclusion really is going to be based on individuals' excitement and desire to participate. Our collective effort has to be to make sure we support that and back that up. So no one is coming after my 11-year-old child and saying, I want you to be in the Nutcracker. I want you to be in the Nutcracker. And I wouldn't expect them to come after Jung either. I would expect that her inclusion in that experience comes from inside her, from her strong desire to be a dancer, from her delight in being on stage. And then when she comes up to say, I want to do this, that's where inclusion happens. When she went through those auditions, those people needed to kind of reorient their thinking and think, okay, what's this going to look like? What does this do? What do we change? What do we not change? And that's where really the sort of community embracing inclusion happens, and I think it's quite honestly, I think it's the whole crux of the situation. So In my ideal world, what I'd like to see is, any theatrical performance in our communities may or may not have people with disabilities, and whether or not they do is entirely dependent on whether people with disabilities in our community want to do that. I don't think that by saying, oh gosh, I think everybody with a disability would want to do this adaptive dance program, right? And let's target those folks and bring them in. To me, that makes some assumptions that may or may not be true. But I'm going to also preface that by saying it's not wrong by any means to have an adaptive PE program, an adaptive ski program, or an inclusive dance troupe. It's not wrong at all. I think it gives our world some very, very positive experiences, but let's just not confuse that with inclusion, because I think they're two separate things.
Thanks, Sarah. We have a follow-up to that. How do you get this across to families that don't even think that that is an option?
I think that is the best question of the day, and I think Isaac and Sierra both kind of embraced it as well. It's that sense of, whoa, wait a minute, people. First, we have to expect this to happen, and I don't care if we're talking about a 1-year-old or a 41-year-old. We have to start with an expectation that it will simply happen. It truly, honestly, never occurred to me to go show up at the dance studio and say, my daughter has Down syndrome, can she participate? No, I just went in. Now, I'm backing that up by saying, if there are any things that we need to do to make it easier for her, we had some dance with glasses, without glasses questions that we had to kind of work out. They asked for some advice about where to position her, like would she be better off if she were in the front, better off if she were in the back. We had, at one point, we took a video so that she could watch the practice over and over again, because she loves to watch herself. So there were some adaptations, but I think that the gist of it really is, make sure you start with that expectation. Make sure you start by, yep, it's going to happen. And right now I'm telling you, violin is going to happen. I'm not really sure how, but it's going to happen, because the idea for our violin lessons came from her, came from something that she wants to do, and came from, it's because she sees other kids in her class doing it, so by golly, she wants to do it. So let's just make sure that our concepts of inclusion start with, what does the kid want to do? And so that's why it makes it a little bit more challenging for those of us that maybe are trained in special ed, because we have this, tendency to want to start first with the accommodations and the modifications. So it's a mindset switch. Change back to, okay, let's go with the expectation that it's going to happen, and then pull in whatever resources you need. It might be the parent, it might be the child's teacher, it might be some volunteer who's always been wanting to help out in some way to make it work if you need some extra supports. But my guess is, once you get into it, then you'll know what support you need, but it's hard to know what that is until you actually start seeing it happen. And I guess I would just say that I really don't consider myself to be this, Pollyanna person. I really do believe that if we have strong expectations, if we use each other, and every single community's got lots and lots of resource people who can be strong and powerful influences to push us in that direction and to help us when we find ourselves in a situation where it doesn't work.
You might be muted, Brenda. We're not hearing you right now.
Okay, and that seems to be it for the questions. Lots of good comments for all of the presenters.
All right, thank you very much. And our presenters, do any of you have any final words you want to say before we end the session for today? Okay, well, thank you very much to all of our presenters, all of our audience members. Please fill out your surveys and have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.